Hello everyone and welcome back to another very exciting and a must-see chess game from the history of chess. So we have Paul Morphy with the white pieces, who needs 0 introductions, and his opponent is Thomas Wilson Barnes. So Thomas Wilson Barnes was actually, in my opinion, was a very important chess player. Now you need to know one thing about Mr. Barnes. He defeated Paul Morphy more than anyone else, more than any of Paul Morphy's opponents. But still Paul Morphy's lifetime record against Thomas Wilson Barnes was still overwhelming. So Paul Morphy and Thomas Wilson Barnes, according to Wikipedia, which is, I believe, a reliable source, so it says they played 27 times, and Thomas Wilson Barnes actually defeated Paul Morphy 7 times, and they drew 1 time, and Paul Morphy defeated Barnes 19 times. But still, 19-7 is not so bad. So Thomas Wilson Barnes was a tough chess player, as he defeated Paul Morphy once again more than any of Paul Morphy's opponents. So let's check out what happened in this chess game. Thomas Wilson Barnes was from England, and perhaps he was the strongest English chess master in 1858, in late 1850s, and in early 1860s. So let's see what happened. This is a chess game from 1858, when Paul Morphy was at his peak. So you should also know that Thomas Barnes defeated Paul Morphy in an equal chess game, always. So Paul Morphy never gave any odds to Thomas Wilson Barnes. So this is a normal chess game. As you can see, Paul Morphy is not playing with any odds. So let's see what happened quickly. Paul Morphy starts the game with e4, e5, f4. And this is the King's Gambit, an interesting moment of this chess game, because Thomas Wilson Barnes is not accepting bishop to c5. Mostly, I see most of the opponents of Paul Morphy usually takes and accepts the King's Gambit, but not Wilson Barnes. Knight to f3, d6, and this is also a very interesting moment of the game. Paul Morphy says, if you don't take my pawn, if you are not going to accept the King's Gambit, maybe you will take the Evans Gambit. So this looks like the Evans Gambit, but actually, technically this is not Evans Gambit because of the move order. So this is known as the heat variation, which is probably very rare. So this is King's Gambit declined, heat variation. And this is also an interesting moment of the game. Thomas Wilson Barnes is again not accepting Paul Morphy's offer, and he is retreating the bishop. When we think about open files, we think Paul Morphy. Okay, so bishop goes back, bishop to c4, knight to f6, queen to e2, developing the pieces. Actually, when Paul Morphy offered the b-pawn, I forgot to tell you, capturing the pawn was a fine move. Thomas Wilson Barnes could definitely accept the pawn sacrifice, but he didn't take it because, again, when we think about open files, open diagonals, we basically think Paul Morphy. So c3 not allowing knight to d4, black castled, d3, exchanging. And I think this is an interesting position. I can easily say Paul Morphy's position is perhaps worst. So for the first time, I see Paul Morphy behind in the development, and Thomas Wilson Barnes push the d-pawn. When your opponent's king haven't castled, pushing the d-pawn is usually a good idea. Pushing the d or the e pawn. So Wilson Barnes simply pushed the pawn, and again, for the first time, which I commentated many chess games of Paul Morphy, I see Morphy behind in the development. Very interesting. So defending the bishop and simply capturing the pawn, and then bishop to g4, and Paul Morphy's knight is also pinned. Paul Morphy haven't castled, and also this diagonal looks dangerous. So because of this diagonal, castling is not easy. So we can say that we can actually prefer black's position over white. Knight from b to d2. Now tell me something. Maybe I'm missing something. I didn't analyze this position with the engine. But maybe knight takes pawn is possible, because if queen takes knight, then rook to e8. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think that is perhaps winning for black. So even, but Wilson Barnes didn't know that. Maybe white could block. Bishop to g4, developing the knight, and now Morphy is defending the e-pawn. Knight to h5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back, and knight to e5. So after retreating the bishop, Paul Morphy is solving the diagonal issue. Knight to e5 and castling from the queen side. Paul Morphy didn't like this position. Knight to d3, perhaps he didn't like this. King to c2, and now knight joins the attack. And capturing the annoying knight, knight takes on f4, so Paul Morphy is giving up his bishop. Queen to f1, queen to e7, h3, kicking the bishop back, and then king to b2, so unpinning the e-pawn, rook from a to d8. In this position, if capturing the pawn, then rook to e1, and this is doom and gloom for black. So this bishop is pinned, and you can't defend. So rook from a to d8, knight to d4, exchanging the pieces, but in this position, actually white is losing. Can you see? White is losing in this position, black is much better. Can you see why? So let me give you a couple of seconds, try to guess the next move of Thomas Wilson Barnes. So try to think the move. So what would you do in this position? We have bishop to e5. So in this position, white has to defend the queen. Queen to e3, and now can you see the follow-up? Well, that is queen takes on b4. And Thomas Wilson Barnes is much better. He is a pawn up, and also the c-pawn is pinned. h4, h5, not allowing h5, knight to c4, defending the bishop, and then exchanging the rooks. G takes on h5, bishop takes on h5, and then queen to g5. Paul Morphy couldn't find any decent move in this position. Queen takes on a7 is a possibility, but then black is simply much better because of bishop to g3. Let's say capturing one more pawn, and then bishop to f3, and we can say that black has a very good compensation. Rook to g1, bishop takes on e4. This is attacking the queen. And also this h-pawn is going to fall, so black is much better. Also black has the bishop here. So defending the queen in this position, Paul Morphy couldn't find any good move. Maybe queen takes on a7 is playable. Maybe he could try that. But again, we saw what happens. Black has a very good compensation. Queen to g5 and simply exchanging the queens. Was that a good idea? No. Paul Morphy is a pawn down. Bishop to f3, rook to f1, bishop to e1. Bishop to e2, forking the rook and the knight. Knight takes on e5, Paul Morphy is giving up the rook for the attack. g6, king to f8, capturing. And knight to g6 is coming, so we have rook to d6. If some random move, then knight to g6 is checkmate. So actually this endgame is losing for Paul Morphy. So knight to f3, rook to f6, knight to g5, rook to f2 check, and we have king to a3, c5, bishop to d5, b5, and checking the king, okay, promoting the queen, but rook is defending, and again, black is a pawn up, but still white has some chances for drawing this chess game. e5, g5. Well, we can also say that Paul Morphy is extremely resilient. He is not giving up, and even when he is losing, he is actually putting up a very good fight. So this shows that even when Paul Morphy had the worst position, he can always be potentially a dangerous player. So this shows that Paul Morphy was definitely a very strong chess player. bishop to h3, and now Paul Morphy pushed the pawn. He is planning to remaneuver his king and going after the pawns after creating a weakness and then drawing this chess game. So b takes on c4, king to b2, and then g4 by Thomas Wilson Barnes. So defending the bishop and g3. So capturing this pawn is not possible. You always have to stay in this diagonal and watch out to g2, and then white can actually sacrifice the bishop, and then white can go after these pawns and then hoping to draw this chess game. So king to c3, bishop to e6, and we have bishop to c6. Okay, I mean, this is very obvious, because if you take the bishop, then black is promoting the queen. So we have, after king to c3, bishop to e6. Why Thomas Wilson Barnes didn't push the g pawn? Then bishop takes on g2, exchanging, and actually in this position, this can be a draw, even though black has the bishop, because promoting this pawn to a queen is not that easy. So we have king to c3, bishop to e6, bishop to c6, king to e7, a3, bishop to d7, bishop to d5. So repeating the moves, and Wilson Barnes is playing precisely now, vacating on e6, and the king is going to come down and then capture the pawn, king to e3, and after pushing the c pawn, Paul Morphy resigned, because if bishop to d1, then king takes on e5. If king to e4, then pushing the pawn, and black is queening. So as you can see, this position is a hopeless position, and Paul Morphy resigned, believe it or not. So Wilson Barnes is going to take Paul Morphy's pawn, and he has passed pawns, and defending is not easy, is almost impossible. So this was a very nice chess game. So I also want to show a chess game when Paul Morphy lost, actually. So this shows that Paul Morphy was a human. So thank you very much for watching. I also think that this chess game was quite instructive for the improving chess players. So thanks again, stay safe, and bye bye.